Hey there, folks. So welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Thomas Rhett called Life Changes. There's a part of me that doesn't even want to pretend that I even care about this album. To basically pull something like a bait and switch and talk about something that actually got dropped this week and got forced back on my schedule because, according to my patrons on Patreon, I should just get this over with because that's the optimum attitude going into an album review that I'm supposed to be professional, right? But look, in all due seriousness, I should have just vetoed this from my schedule. I didn't because I've got a morbid sense of curiosity surrounding this guy's inexplicable popularity. You know what? I can't even say that. I know exactly why Thomas Rhett is popular. He makes doofy pop music for people terrified of the raw sexuality of Bruno Mars. I've always found it contemptible that he's still advertised on country radio because, let's be honest, he belongs on the pop stations, but he'd also be consigned to the same territory as the B and C list acts like Andy Grammer, or just get stuck playing catch-up to Charlie Puth, Shawn Mendes, and Ed Sheeran, if he's not just gonna rip them off entirely, because he's done that before. Take a look at Die Happy Man. Now look, my larger point is that going into Life Changes, I didn't expect the genre-defying abomination that was Tangled Up from the lead-off singles. I expected something more normal and sedate after the success of Die Happy Man. A set of pleasant, underwhelming, milquetoast pop music that would be forgettable to listen through and absolute torture for me to review. But at the same time, it's not like Craving You with Maren Morris or Unforgettable were bad songs. They weren't country, but they were at least passable. And you really have nowhere to go but up after Tangled Up, and I've heard far worse than that album this year. So maybe this would at least be inoffensive for me to cover? Well, folks, after giving this a very fair number of listens, I gotta say this definitively, this is the best album that Thomas Rhett has released to date. Yeah, what much of the buzz is suggesting is actually kind of true. This is actually passable for pop country. It's not great by any stretch of the imagination, and again, by the standards of pop country, I have certainly heard stuff I would prefer to hear more, but if you were coming here expecting me to rant like what happened with Tangled Up, no, I can't. I actually didn't mind this that much, and the presence of a few genuinely good to great tracks gives this just enough leeway to work for what it is. It's actually passable. Of course, answering that question about what this record actually is can be an exercise in and of itself, because if we're looking at pop country as a subgenre, this is decidedly cribbing more from the pop side, and often not really to its credit. I've heard some critics make a Bruno Mars comparison in the more pronounced grooves on songs like Craving You, but in truth, it's much closer to a somehow even whiter Maroon 5 wannabe, but then raised on a diet of late 90s boy bands and the more sanitized side of modern pop. Seriously, Sweetheart with its doo-wop touches reminds me more of Tears on My Pillow from Grease than anything else. Smooth Like the Summer is a Duran Duran knockoff if I've heard one. And I know for the fact that the Backstreet Boys have made heavier songs than both Kiss Me Like a Stranger and Gateway Love. And yet, here's the important thing. It looks like somebody in the production booth actually figured out what the hell they were doing and assembled mixes that sound halfway decent from a pop standard. Mostly by allowing the guitars to carry a little bit more meat and low end in their groove when they're not trying for these funkier tones that just kind of sound weird, and ensuring that a melody does indeed anchor these songs and these hooks. Now again, I struggle to call most of this precisely good. It still feels like a pale facsimile of better songs and better sounds. The bass lines, they all need a boost to make any of these grooves remotely convincing, and nobody needs the trap elements that started creeping through on songs like When You Look Like That or Grave. Thank God the hook on that latter track is good, or I'd be a lot harder on it. You know what, it's certainly more tolerable than the Chainsmokers ripoff that is Leave Right Now, that somehow sounds even more insubstantial, and that's saying something coming from the Chainsmokers debut this year, and it's not helped by Thomas Rhett himself. Outside of songs where he's just not trying on like Smooth Like the Summer or failing to belt on Sweetheart, his voice is passable enough. And when he's got some multi-tracking behind him, the harmonies, they are not bad. But he's not bringing a ton of charisma or intensity or potency or even charm to these songs as a vocalist. There's just not a lot to him as a singer or performer. But here's the thing. For the most part, all the songs that I described, they're pop songs. They're passable songs, sure, but what's very telling is that when this record actually flips over to making more country songs, it actually gets a fair bit better. Yeah, Renegades is a Kip Moore ripoff, sure, but it's well produced with real momentum, and it was a pleasant surprise to actually hear some fiddle on the collaboration with his father, Drink a Little Beer, even if their interplay outside of the harmonies on the hook does kind of feel a little bit forced. And between the organ on Grave and the piano behind Marry Me, there are melodies, especially in the keyboards, that ground these hooks pretty well. Not the synthesizers, but we don't want to hear those anyway. It's not reinventing the wheel, sure, and you can definitely hear traces of the Zac Brown band in some of the chord progressions, and the production is all a lot smoother than I would personally prefer, but you know what? Good tone, decent grooves, and solid melodies can make up for a lot with me. I will say that it's very telling how short so many of these songs are. This is a 14-track album that runs a brisk 46 minutes, and between songs ending rather abruptly and a faster cadence for most of these songs overall, it's hard not to get the feeling that, like Tangled Up, Thomas Rhett is sampling as many sounds as possible to find something, anything that could stick. The only difference this time around is that a little bit more maturity and sharper production makes some of the tunes actually do stick out. And hey, you know what, it goes by fast enough, it doesn't really bother me. It's not like it's gonna drag on here. But of course, part of this comes back to the content, and considering how obnoxious Thomas Rhett's lyrics have been in the past, him actually growing up and away from bro country, that's a good step for him. And you know what, to his credit, more personality is starting to come through in some of his writing as well, moving away from entitled all-American middle-class white boy to the sort of inoffensive, doofy, love-struck bro who's more basic than outright offensive. I mean, the title track is quite literally humble bragging about his wife getting verified on Instagram, for God's sakes. You get the impression that she's more interesting than he is. Now, granted, that relationship does provide something of a core to songs like the Nostalgia Trip for 16, or the string of love songs peppering the back half of the album that, despite rather differing sounds, can feel pretty interchangeable lyrically, albeit rather sincere. But on the other hand, it makes songs like Gateway Love have that stink of entitlement still, where the girl has clearly moved on to a new relationship, and yet he's wondering if he ever sparked the same feelings. Dude, you're married. You don't need to even wonder about this right now. And that's before you get Leave Right Now, which has him quite literally trying to steal the girlfriend from some guy, and at this point, I just don't even buy it. Not that I ever thought he was a charisma powerhouse in the first place, but it feels out of character for the guy on this album as a happily married man who, unforgettable, admits to actually doing the Running Man. It's actually kind of charming in a sweet sort of way for his girl, and now he's gonna try to steal some girlfriend? No, I don't buy it. Now, I'm sure some of you might wonder if this issue actually carries over to Marry Me, except I actually argue it's easily the high point of the album, as initially we get the bait and switch of the girl getting married, but not to him, but instead of actually making a scene at the wedding in face of any lingering emotions, Thomas Rhett swallows hard, downs a whiskey, and actually congratulates her. She's moved on, so should he. He gets that, and it's a moment of maturity that actually feels genuine. Again, best song on the album. But to wrap all this up, look, my biggest issues with Thomas Rhett have always been threefold. He belongs on pop radio, not country radio. His writing made him come across more like a leering douchebag more often than not. And again, he often wholesale copied other styles that are distinctive flavor and sound of his own. With life changes, well, okay, the first is still true, but that's not entirely his fault given the profound identity crisis mainstream country is experiencing in 2017, and he very much feels like a product of his label. He's gonna go where they point him. And while he's still taking from other styles of production, at this point this record still feels kind of patchwork. An increase in maturity does mean there is a little bit more unique personality for him at his core, and the lyrics aren't quite as obnoxious. I don't quite think he's a very distinct songwriter here, and much of the record feels entirely too sanitized for my own taste. There isn't a lot of bite in this production. But you know what, for the first time, I can actually hear quality behind the best of these tracks. There are some good hooks, which means, you know what, I can't believe I'm doing this. Very light 6 out of 10, and really only a recommendation to fans, but you know what, if it's on pop radio, you could do worse. Check it out if you're interested. It ain't bad. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know, folks, I was really hard on them 2 years ago, but I can't lie to myself. If the songs are good, the songs are good. I'll give him a bit of a pass for that, because this is, again, probably his best record. Not a great record, barely even a good one, but you know what? There's enough quality for me to recommend it. If you want to buy it, links in the description below. I got the pull up there. I know a lot of diehard Thomas Rhett fans, you'll probably come down on me for being too hard on him even still, but you know what? He's made an improvement. Be grateful for that. Beyond that, if you guys want to get involved in my schedule so you guys can ensure records that are not this old are coming up right now, the link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you get to add records or even movies or even a top 10 list to that schedule. And I got a top 10 list in the works right now. It's going to be a doozy. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.